Hello and welcome to Art Camp 2. First off, let me just say thank you to all of you who signed up. It really means a lot to me, and I think we're going to have an awesome time this summer. For those of you who have not done Art Camp 1, welcome to the new world of being an art camp. And of course, for those who already took Art Camp 1, thanks for signing up again. I'm glad you enjoyed the first one enough to give the second one a shot. So the course for Art Camp 2 is a little bit different than the first one. I'm still focused on fundamentals and I'm still focused on trying to improve your really basic skills, but we're going to be kind of pushed into territory that I never got to touch on in the first Art Camp. And so that's really what this one is all about, is exploring some new ground that I kind of wish I had had time to cover the first time, but there just wasn't enough weeks in the course to do it all. So this is some material that I kind of wish I had had time to cover, but just couldn't find the time. So of course this first week is seeing and drawing. And so for this I wanted to take us back to the extreme basics of what art making is all about. And if you really, really boil it down, eventually you come to the point where you're talking about drawing. The very simple act of drawing, of taking something that you're looking at, whether it's a piece of reference or something, and putting it down onto paper. And it's a very fundamental skill, but it's something that all of us need to learn and all of us really need to improve on as well. If you can't draw well, it doesn't really matter how good your painting skills are. It doesn't matter how good your lighting is, your colors are, your rendering is. None of that stuff really matters unless your drawing is in the right place. And so drawing is sort of it's a task that takes many, many years to learn and a whole long time to really master. But it's something that we should all be pursuing and trying to improve upon. You can never get to a point with your drawing that you've truly completed it. You never get to a point where your drawing is just perfect. And so it's something we just all need to keep working on, keep improving, and continuing to pay attention to. Even for advanced artists, it can be really easy to get into a rut of not really paying attention to your drawing, knowing that your drawing is pretty good, but it's nothing really exceptional. And so sometimes it's good, even once you get fairly advanced, to take a step back and really get back into the drawing. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about. If you're at a very beginner level, this stuff is perfect. This is some of the basic fundamental stuff you should learn. And if you're a little more advanced, it might seem a little too basic, but try taking a step back and doing some of these exercises. You might be a little surprised how they can improve your eye and help you out a little bit. So there are a lot of different ways to draw. There are a lot of different methods, a lot of different techniques, and many different schools of thought on what is the best way to learn how to draw. And I'm going to touch on a couple of them that I find the most useful, and they're not even necessarily the ones that I use the most for myself. I tend to draw and paint better when I'm thinking of shapes. Some people deal better with outlines and with thinking about that sort of stuff. But it's a good idea, no matter what you find most comfortable, to try out all these different things. They inform each other, so even if you're best with a brush, learning how to draw with a pencil is extremely important. Now I'm doing all the demos today digitally because I figure most of you are going to do them digitally, and so I figured I'd cater to that. So I'll show you how to do all this stuff digitally. That said, in just a few weeks, I'm going to be pushing you all to do traditional materials, which I'm really, really excited about. I can't wait to make you do that kind of stuff. I'm really excited to see what comes out of that. But for now, like, if you're just a digital guy, that's totally fine, and I understand that. So let's talk a little bit about drawing and the best way to go about that. And I've got a couple exercises in mind. I've sort of broken it up into 3 parts, and we're going to start with really, really fundamental exercise. Just like I did with Art Camp 1, I'm going to be mainly focusing on master studies again, going back to the old masters and learning from them. It's a really good source to pull from. It's better than photographs, in my opinion, and it's just a really expedited way to teach yourself art. And so here's a little head study by Sargent. It's a really gorgeous little painting, really nice stuff going on in here. It's really, really well done. You can learn a lot just from painting something like this. but I want to teach drawing right now, and so I'm going to be focused on the drawing. And so there's a kind of cool little exercise that I was taught by a couple instructors way back in the day that I find really useful for going back to the extreme basics of drawing. And so we're going to take this little head here, and we're going to use a little Photoshop thing, going into image adjustments and down to threshold. And it's going to break it into a black and white image for us. As you move the slider, it kind of changes the point at which things are black or which things are white. So we're going to find a cool little point where you can still tell it's a face, but it's removing most of the detail. If you go a little too far one way or the other, that's kind of fine. There's no real good or bad point to this. Just have a lot of cool little shapes broken up. So I'm going to go for something like that. And then I'm going to further abstract this thing, I'm going to flip it upside down. And so at this point, we've got this weird abstract grouping of black and white shapes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put this into another image here, just for the ease of copying this thing. And so I'm mainly focused on the head area, so I'm actually just going to crop off the bottom of that. So there's our little head. It looks all weird, and that is exactly what we're shooting for. You could do this with completely abstract random shapes, still learn a lot, but at least this way you're sort of copying from something awesome that's already a master study. So it's just a good way to get some random shapes in there. Now, let's actually get on to doing some drawing. So the first thing you want to do when you're trying to copy some reference or any kind of figure or anything is establish a top and a bottom. Establish a mark that's the top of what you're drawing and the bottom of what you're drawing. Now, if you're doing something called sight size, you can actually sort of just draw a line over from your reference and straight onto your page. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more when we do the third exercise today. It has a lot of benefit, and if you want to go for it and try to explore some of that, it can be very good for you. I'm going to lean away from teaching sight size directly because I find it can be a little restraining. It can be a little too technical for some people. That said, if you're really interested in it, do some reading up on it and try it out for yourself. For some people, it can be very, very handy, but it can also lead to a little bit too much copying and not quite enough thinking. And so I'm mainly interested today in teaching your eye and teaching you how to draw and see better. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll sort of eyeball a top and a bottom to this. And so those are your sort of restraining things, and it will keep you in check. It'll make sure as you're drawing this head, you don't go, a little bit out of the shape. And all of a sudden things start stretching and pulling, and you kind of lose sight of things. But at least this way you know where the top is and where you know the bottom is. Now, there's a couple of tricks when you're drawing that you should constantly be doing, both manually and eventually it'll be a little bit more in your head. And those things are dropping verticals and horizontals and then measuring distances between things. And so let me explain a little bit about that before we really start diving into the drawing. The first thing is dropping horizontals and verticals on an image. And that is to say, you take a landmark, say this point of the chin. It's the furthest point at the top of the drawing now, and it's a pretty easily defined landmark. And so what you're basically doing, whether you do it manually or whether you do it just optically, is dropping a vertical line from that point. And that has some really useful things as you start to develop the drawing, in that you can start to see where it's intersecting things. You can start to see, all right, that's where it's going to intersect the bottom of it. That's how much of the forehead is going to be on this side. That's how much of the forehead is going to be on the other side. And you start to see where it's intersecting those things. And that can be a really useful thing because you find out, for instance, that it just so happens that the corner of this little eye socket is perfectly aligned with that. And that means that as you're going about the drawing, you know that those things are going to be lined up. So as you start to draw on your piece over here, you know without any doubt that if you put the bottom of the chin right there, that if you draw a straight line at some point along this line, there's going to be that eyebrow there. So you're going to know that without any doubt. And so having that point of reference is extremely useful. And that's something you can do the whole time. You can, let's see here, you can do this for every little part. Because you can see you can drop it from this little nose shape here. And you realize that the very outside of that is the very inside of this little eye socket here. This little end point of that shape. And so this is what you're just going to be constantly doing, is dropping these verticals and seeing where lines intersect. Same goes for doing the horizontals. Since this is a fairly straight-on view of a shape of a face, a lot of the features are going to be lined up here. So it's not going to come in handy too much, but it's still going to help us for getting things really exact and right where they need to be. And you'll see there's a slight tilt to the whole face, and so things aren't ever going to be perfectly on this horizontal. But it's thinking about those constant horizontal, vertical checks, and that's a really, really important thing. Another thing is going to be measuring. The first measuring point that's really handy to get is a center point. Where is the exact center between these two? And the thing to do is to sort of eyeball it. So you can get something down on the paper. Then the thing you want to do is you can do it with just your stylus, or of course you can do it like, digital ways. But basically just put out your stylus in front of you, keep it at arm's length as far away as you can, and line it up. Line up the tip of the pencil down with where your thumb is. I'll try to post up a photo or something like this to explain it a little more clearly. But basically you're just going to stick it out as far as you can so that it's at a set point, and then you're going to mark a little distance to see how far something is. And so if you're sticking out your stylus and say your thumb is right there, you're going to have from the thumb to the tip of the pencil there, and that's going to be your measuring point. And then you can just move your whole hand up to the top to see that it's the exact same distance. I know that's a really crude example of that, but hopefully it kind of makes sense. If not, I'll try to write out or photograph exactly how to do this. But it's a fundamental thing of how to measure things. And so establishing our center point is extremely useful because it gives us a point of reference beyond just our top and verticals that can really help us. And so we can kind of figure out, like on this drawing as well, where our center point is. And it looks like it'll be about right there. And it gives us a point of reference on where the rest of these shapes are going to go. You can see that both the eyes are below that center point, and the rest of these features are above it. And you can see exactly where it's intersecting at this point. And so that's a really useful thing to sort of establish. And so beyond that, measuring is going to come in handy a whole lot. For instance, let's see here. We can find out, all right, if we establish how far this nose is from the chin, if we go and measure that, we can then take this and take it down, and we can see where that distance is going to get us again. And so it looks like it's going to land us right about in the middle of the forehead. So as we're drawing our shapes over here, and we know that all of this is going to be grouped up above this center line, we can also figure out exactly where the center of the forehead is going to be. And so start to break up the shapes like that. And so this is going to be a constant thing of measuring, of figuring out how wide something is, how tall something is. And these are the sort of steps that you sort of need to take manually for a long time. You need to actually physically do this, physically measure things again and again and again and again. And it really seems tedious at first. It's really a boring, terrible process that seems awful, and you're going to wonder as you're doing this whether you're ever going to learn how to do this by yourself. And the thing is that you really will. By doing this manually, by forcing yourself to get all the proportions just right, by forcing yourself to get all of these different measurements just accurate, you are going to be training your eye to sort of figure these things out for yourself. And so as we start drawing here, I'm going to be basically drawing the way that I was taught how to draw. In that, basically I was taught you start drawing and then you check yourself. I find that if you do a little bit too much measuring on early on, you're going to lose a little bit of faith in the drawing itself. You're going to get really bored. So I'm going to be doing some measuring, of course. And I'll just go ahead and draw all my guidelines right on the thing itself. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with like having a few guidelines in your drawing. And of course, you can always do, of course, what's the halfway mark of the halfway mark. So if you've got this space here, but you're a little unsure where things are at in between there, go ahead and do another halfway point. Figure out what the halfway point of that is. And you can see it's actually the tip of this little nose shadow here. And so that's a really handy thing to know that it's basically more or less in the middle of this top section. Maybe it's a little bit below that, but it's pretty close to that. And so knowing that that's right there, and of course we can measure that vertical there, and notice that our tip of that nose is just a little off to the left. That becomes a really handy thing, because then we can basically know where that shape is going to end up. Now the other really useful thing that you'll need to sort of measure and get used to drawing is angles. That's the other thing that really makes things look exactly how they do. But it can also be a really difficult thing. For instance, I'm just going to go off to the side of my paper here a little bit. And so how do you mimic that angle? What's the best way to do that? What's the best way to know that you're getting that angle just right and you're not drawing something a little too steep or a little too shallow? How do you make sure you get that exact angle? And there's a couple little tricks to do. And the first one to do is sort of to imagine both a vertical and a horizontal and how it's comparing to that. And you can also sort of compare like a 45-degree angle between those. And this can be really, really handy because even just mentally figuring out like, all right, now I've got this vertical and horizontal, and I can see it's a little bit below this 45. It's a little bit more of a shallow angle. That can be a really handy thing just to keep in mind. And often that trick alone is enough to get you to realize just how vertical or horizontal something is. Because as you start to break into it, you'd be able to basically break it down so that that line is the angle there of that shape, but put a vertical there. And then you can suddenly see, all right, that's how far off from vertical that shape is. And so that's a really handy thing to do. You can hold up your pencil and sort of try to copy the angle and then move it over to your paper or whatever and try to copy it again. I've never had much luck with that because I've found that the angles tend to change a little bit too much when you're moving. It's a little too hard to keep your hand exactly steady. And so I find that the optical trick of checking yourself on the verticals and horizontals to be a really, really handy thing. So that's another trick for checking yourself. One thing you can do as you're starting to draw this sort of stuff, again, just another way to check yourself. Because, as I'm saying, it's basically putting marks down and then checking to make sure they're right. Checking to make sure they're in the right place, they're the right size, they're the right angle. Constantly checking yourself. That's what I'm just going to be harping on the whole time. And that's really what you're going to be striving for this week, is just getting your drawings just right, getting everything in the right place. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be the guy who just goes in here with a single line, unbroken line, and gets everything exactly right, and it's perfect, and that's what really good drawing looks like. Because it's not necessarily. Drawing is a lot of imperfection and then perfecting. Taking something that's not that perfect and trying to make it better and better and better and more accurate and more accurate. And that just takes a lot of time, a lot of practice. And so as I was saying, another way you can sort of check yourself is to flick your eye back and forth. Constantly flick, 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 flick. And often when you do this, things will pop out to you as too wide or too steep or too narrow, or something will just look a little bit off. And so that can be a really good way to pop out the things that are a little bit off in your drawing, the things you really need to be working on. And so, it looks like this drawing's a little bit too wide there. And so I'm just going to start drawing here, figuring this stuff out. And the reason that I'm starting with abstract shapes here, as opposed to just drawing a portrait or something like that, is that it's very easy for us to get caught up in what we're drawing. And we'll no longer draw these abstract shapes. We'll draw what we think we're seeing. We'll draw what we think a mouth looks like, what a nose looks like, and we won't draw those abstract shapes anymore. And I really want to stress the importance of seeing abstractly, of seeing these shapes not as what they are, but just as shapes. It's a really important lesson to learn, and something that will come in handy for your whole artistic life. And so just breaking these things up into shapes. And of course I'll say as a quick disclaimer that, again, I am not a master draftsman, and so I don't claim to have, fantastic line quality or anything like that. I'd be much more comfortable doing all of this with a big wide brush. But I think it's always good to, push yourself outside of your comfort zone, try different techniques for drawing, try different things. Again, let's figure out where the horizontal is of that shape. Looks like it ends about right there. Again, figuring out the angle of this shape right here. Think about that vertical, think about that horizontal, and you'll see it's a little bit steeper than a 45-degree angle there. Not too much, but enough. Another of my favorite tricks for checking yourself is checking your by flipping everything. By mirroring everything. So the easy way, of course, to do that digitally is just to flip everything on the canvas. And that can be a really easy way to check. Make sure you've got everything in the right place. I've, of course, noticed that my distances here are a little bit off, and so my center point's a little bit off. It's because I was a little too sloppy with my initial block in. And so let me go ahead and take that out. Actual center point's a little bit lower, which is why things were getting a little bit off. So again, the importance of getting everything just right. Drawing is a lot of this little finicky perfections and getting everything just where it's supposed to be. Another thing that I didn't mention is also figuring out your widths as opposed to your heights. And so what I mean by that is you can figure out, for instance, let's say we take half of our vertical here, and we figure out what that is. And so there's half of our vertical. From the halfway point to the bottom or the other way to the top. It's the same either way. And so basically taking this, and if you're doing this manually, of course, you can do it with your hand holding your pencil or whatever, and figure out the width of this. And you'll see that it's obviously more than just one width, but you can kind of carry it up and down and see where it's going to line up as about the same width. And this is a really handy thing to make sure you're not squishing your drawing too much, to make sure you're not fattening it too much, or narrowing it too much. We tend to have a tendency to do one of those things. And so this is a really good way to check yourself and make sure you're getting everything where it should be. And so you'll see that the width of it is generally about right here. And so right about the top of this mouth shape should be about half of are vertical. And so that's a really handy thing to know. And so we can take our drawing over here, hold on, figure out our length here, rotate it, and we'll know that about right here should be about that wide. And we can see that it's almost there, but it looks like with this added shape over here, this little white shape on the side, we're probably going to be about right. I just need to add that little extra shape there. So that means we're about right on the size of these shapes, which is good. So again, it's just that constant checking, making sure things are in the right place, measuring, checking yourself again and again and again and again. You can see that these two shapes are pretty well aligned, and so we can just drop something down there. We know it's below that vertical, and we can throw in our little eye shape here. It's really handy doing this abstracted thing where it's just black and white, because it's so easy to get lost in what we're drawing. People tend to overcomplicate drawing eyes, for instance. But if you just see it as this abstract shape of black and white, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more manageable. It's something that we can all of a sudden kind of handle. So we'll just do these. So I'll definitely want you to do a few of these this week, because it's going to be really handy for you. Even if you're feeling pretty comfortable with your drawings, taking a step back and going to this level of reducing everything to shape and then really pushing your measuring, making sure everything's in exactly the right place. It's going to be a really handy exercise for you. And as you remember, when we dropped this vertical, of course we knew that it lined up with this shape, so we know exactly where to put this shape. And we also know that it's lined up pretty much perfectly with the top of this one, and so we know exactly where to put that line. So the more right things you have on your canvas or on your page, the easier it is to draw. If you know something is in exactly the right place, is exactly the right size, you can base all your other measurements on it, and it's going to be a whole lot easier. So I'm not going to push this to an extreme perfection just because I want to get on to the other stuff I'll be demoing. But, you know, if you put a couple hours into one of these, that's totally fine. The point is not necessarily to have a gorgeous finished drawing. The point is to work on your drawing, to work on your measuring, to really work on training your eye. This week I'm not teaching you how to do gorgeous drawings. Believe it or not, I'm not super interested in you having beautiful, amazing drawings at the end of this week. I'm mainly interested in teaching you how to train your eye, how to see better, how to see more accurately, because it's a skill that's going to be carried over into everything you do, and it's an incredibly useful skill. And so this is one of the exercises that I think is really useful for doing that. You know, sometimes take a step back, zoom out, see if everything's looking right, see if things are looking a little weird. And you know, I can notice that this thing dropped down like way too far. Just check yourself. Squint at your drawing, see if things are in the right place. Draw verticals, horizontals to check yourself. Make sure things aren't getting too wide or too narrow. Measure. Never measure too much. This is going to be a really finicky week, and you're probably going to hate a lot of it. But that's to be expected. Maybe you'll get into it and really enjoy it. We'll see. But either way, this is all about an exercise that will just improve your skills, no matter what you're doing. So I'm filling in my shapes here. You can keep it just as an outline of your shapes, and that will really help some of you that think a little bit better in line. Um, and so at some point, just to see how terrible my drawing looks, I'll flip it upside down. And yeah, it looks a little bit weird. A couple of my shapes are wrong. Things are a little bit off. But, in general, it's looking more or less like a face. And, you can keep working on it like this if you think it'll help you a little bit more. Sometimes it can. Otherwise, see that it's a little bit off and then flip it back upside down and keep carrying on, trying to get those shapes just right. So I kind of want to get on to some of the other exercises. I know this is not a perfect drawing, but I think I've showed you sort of the direction you want to take these. It just comes down to putting more and more time into this. These things can take you a long time. They can be really short. And it doesn't really matter how long you spend on them. You can spend a few hours on something like this and keep getting more out of it. Because again, it doesn't really matter what your finished drawing looks like. It matters how much time you're spending on observation, on correcting yourself, on checking your measurements, on all that sort of stuff. That's the really important thing that I want you to get out of this week, is that mindset of constantly checking yourself, checking your drawing, making sure it's just right, and also reducing things into abstract shapes. It's a very useful ability and something that carries over again into all aspects of the work you're going to do. So let's flip that upside down again. And so, again, not super accurate because, we all need to work on a drawing some more. But it's heading in that direction. And, I could do this vertical a little bit and fix some of this stuff. And that's sort of what you're looking to do. Once again, I'll say it's not about getting it perfect the first time. Some people can just draw perfectly the first time they put down a mark. And if you can do that, then I am jealous of you. But I do not have that ability, nor have I ever had that ability, nor do I ever think I will have that ability. And that's fine, because I know that even if I can't get the mark down exactly right the first time, that I know how to check myself. I know these general rules, and I know how to keep working on it to get it more and more accurate all the time. And so I know all these tricks to flip it, to measure things, to measure halfway points, to measure widths and heights, to measure angles, to check all these things so that I can eventually get to that point of having a perfect drawing. And now I'll say once again, you're probably going to be frustrated by all of this at first, but the thing is to just keep working on it. This is an ability that is slowly developed over time, and the more you do this, the more comfortable you'll be doing this, and the better and better your drawings will get. And so with that, let's head on to the next exercise. All right, so for this one, for the second exercise, I want to show you how you can take a regular old master painting and actually do a drawing study of it. There's a wealth of master paintings that you can do studies of, and as we learned in Art Camp 1, master studies are of course incredibly useful, but they're also incredibly useful just for learning drawing ability. So last time we took one and really abstracted it to really basic shapes, and while I want you to sort of do that mentally, I want to teach you now how to break down something that's actually complicated painting and learn the drawing from it. So for this, I'm mainly interested in doing kind of a head portrait study. So I'm actually not going to draw the whole piece here, but mainly focus on, all right, let's draw a little head here. And so it's going to be a lot of the same things of measuring angles, measuring top to bottom, figuring out general shapes, and then drawing some actual shapes inside of that. And so the first thing to do is notice, of course, that this head is at an angle. and it's figuring out exactly what that angle is. And again, draw through the center of the face, draw vertical, draw horizontal, see how far off it is, and try to get it as close as you can on your paper. So start by establishing that center line as well as you can, and then kind of measure a top and a bottom from that point. Obviously the bottom's a little confusing. There's facial hair down there, exactly where your top is, exactly where your bottom is. It's a little hard to eyeball. Hair kind of makes things difficult like that. And so we'll just kind of throw in those marks. And then the first thing I want to do is sort of get this overall head shape. What's this overall shape of his head? Let's try to see if we can get that sort of shape on our paper first, before we get into dealing with too much of those intricate details. And so again, let's think about if this little point right here at the top of my vertical is going to be this little obvious point on his hair. Remember, of course, we can drop a vertical from that point and see where that intersects. And you'll notice it sort of intersects at the bottom of this little jawbone area going into his facial hair. And so that's kind of a useful thing to know, is that if we do drop that vertical, we know that this point is the same as this point somewhere along this line. And so that's a handy little landmark to get in there. It kind of comes down to almost connecting the dots at a certain point. So let's start to draw these things in there. So we know that's about where his facial hair is, and so we can pull in there. So it can be really handy to take a finished painting like this and then take it a step back to that drawing stage to really get the construction right. Some people actually start their master studies somewhat similarly to this, and it can be a good way to start things out. Now I'm realizing that this should probably be a little bit further out. It should come in a little bit more. So let's get that a little bit more like that. Just reducing it down to shapes. And this is really something you want to do, whether you're drawing from life, whether you're drawing from reference. Even as you start to draw from more from imagination, a lot of it does come down to breaking it down to these abstract shapes. So this is just a really useful exercise in general. It's learning how to reduce things like that. Taking complexity and trying to simplify it as much as you can. And now another case of measuring, figuring out, all right, how long is this nose by comparing it with the shape of the forehead. And if you draw that kind of line through his face, you realize that the brow of this, the eyes, is somewhere in the middle. So if you figure that out, you can kind of figure out how far down the nose should be. And so you figure it's somewhere around right there. And so I'm going to have you do quite a number of these, because again, they're really useful. Master studies just have so many uses, because you're taking an artist's incredible interpretation of, in this case, the human figure, and just stealing all the knowledge that he has about it. The artist has wonderfully abstracted and simplified and accentuated the human figure, And you basically get to take all that hard work and get it the easy way. And so it's a really handy thing to study from. Um, it's really sad, but someone recently told me that they had gone to art school for 4 years, and it wasn't until they took my first art camp course that someone actually told them to do a master study. And it's really sad to hear that, um, because it's such an important exercise, and it's sad that um, any school wouldn't be teaching it, because again, it's so useful, and it helps really with every aspect of art making. So again, just breaking this down into little shapes. We'll go ahead and flip this, see how I'm doing here. See if any things are popping out, if everything looks more or less in the right shape. Based on where I kind of drew my bottom point there, I think the facial hair, of course, extends further down below there. It's the problem with dealing with like beards and shapes like that, is they can be a little bit hard to distinguish where the beginning is and where the end is. But you kind of have to make just a decision on what you think is the most sensible place to put that line. Just a general tip on drawings. If your drawings are looking a little too weak, like they don't feel quite exact enough or then like solid enough, and you're just not sure why, you might try drawing with a few more straight lines. You might be trying to put in too many curves into your drawing, and you might just go back in and try to simplify things by just drawing straight lines between shapes. Try to break it down into really geometric patterns like that. Take something that has a little bit of curve to it, and rather than drawing it with that curve that's actually there, go ahead and just draw a straight line. It's something that you might find really useful and add a little bit more solidity to your drawings. So I'm going to flip this back. See, that goes down in there. So I think I put this chin a little bit too high. Again, just always checking those verticals, always checking those horizontals, seeing where things intersect. That pit of that eye. Just always checking yourself, trying to get it more and more accurate with everything you draw. I don't expect you to do any perfect drawings, but I expect you to learn how to make them more and more perfect. That's really the goal here. Get your eye trained so you can see the imperfections, so you can see how to fix it, so you can see how to make better drawings. That's mainly what I'm interested in teaching. I'm not going to be too focused on rendering or anything like that for this. In fact, I'd suggest that if you do want to put some rendering into these drawings, to keep it as simple as possible. Reduce it down to 2 values, maybe 3, but mainly just shadow shapes. Figure out what the dark shapes are, what the light shapes are, and that's it. Don't have any rendering beyond that. It's not really needed, and it's not really the point of this exercise. We're going to get more into rendering and figuring out light and shadow later on in this course. But for now, I'm mainly interested in figuring out what the shapes are, getting the shapes in the right place, the right size, getting the drawing just right. And then as we start to get that a little bit more perfect, we'll get into actually rendering these things. So if you're going to do a little bit of rendering, just kind of block in a dark shape and a light shape. It's something that might help you to read things a little bit better, read the shapes a bit better too, so it's not really a bad thing. I know it helps me a lot when I start to put in those values, because then I can see the shapes for what they are. First I see that I've got the eyes a little bit off, so I'm going to do the digital cheat of moving them. Of course, if you're doing this traditionally, you've got to do it by hand. And in some ways it's better to learn to do that. I, of course, learned a lot of my drawing stuff traditionally, and it can be a really good exercise, because then if you ever get anything wrong, you realize you've got to redraw something. And so you spend a little bit more time making sure everything's exactly in the right place before you put too much time in drawing it. Us people that have gotten a little too comfortable with digital are used to being able to just move things and change things at a whim. Another useful thing for drawing is also looking at the negative shapes, looking at the shapes around a shape. So you've got the head here, for instance. So let's take this, and just for the sake of outlining. So you've got the shape of the head. Hold on, get a tool that actually works. There we go. So you got the shape of the head, but there's another way to figure out this line, and that is by starting to figure out what the negative shape is. So let's look at this shape as something in of itself. And all of a sudden trying to draw this, trying to draw the shape around the shape. You know, what are the outlines for this? What are the proportions for this? How do you figure that out? And so going back into our drawing and thinking about it more in terms of a shape right here, and starting to see those negative shapes. That can be something that's incredibly useful, especially for beginners that are having a little trouble abstracting things. This is part of the reason I did that first exercise that was so abstract, is again just to really see more shapes than what you're drawing. And if you're getting a little too wrapped up in what you're drawing, this can be a great way to step back and figure out exactly what's going wrong with your drawing. And so it's a nice little trick, again, to check yourself, improve your drawings just a little bit. So just a little something to think about. There are a lot of these little tricks for drawing, a lot of these little tricks for getting better at it. And so it's just learning those rules, and then it's putting in tons and tons and tons and tons of hours, just getting better and better at it. I'm not going to say that any of you are going to, master drawing this week, because it's just not going to happen. And so with that knowledge, kind of get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with the fact that you're not going to learn how to draw this week. You're going to learn how to draw better this week, for sure, because you're going to put in all this time and you're going to put in all this energy. But it's going to take you a lot of time to really learn how to draw incredibly well. And so just start putting in those hours and hours of practice, and start learning to really get things just right. It can be a little too easy to get in the habit of drawing things fairly right, but not worrying enough about accuracy. And so for this time, for this week, I really want you worried about accuracy, with getting things just right. So just like the last one, I'm not going to be pushing this to, super refined finish or anything like that, because it's not exactly the point of what I'm showing here. I just want to show you how to get generally started on this, how to break down something that's nicely painted, and actually do a drawing study of it. It is possible to do drawing master studies of drawings, obviously. You can find drawings by all the great masters usually, or at least quite a few of them. And those can be a great resource for improving your drawings, because then you actually get to see what their drawings look like, which is it's really a handy thing. And so I'd recommend checking that out. But there's just a wealth of paintings to draw from, and so that's kind of why I want to focus on the fact that you can take a really gorgeous painting that you really love and then learn how to do that drawing. As I talked about in the Art Camp 1 Master Painting lesson, there's a lot of different things you can focus on in doing a master study. And so for this, it's basically just focusing on the drawing, focusing on how they broke down a figure, how they drew that figure, how they stylized that figure, what they accentuated, what they didn't, learning the proportions of those things. So there's a wealth of information to learn just about that. And so that's really what we're focused on with this. Just like you can focus on color, you can also focus on just drawing. And so that's the benefit of doing these exercises. All right. So I'm not going to take this too much further. I've got the drawing in generally the right place and sort of showed you how to approach it. So at this point, if you wanted to take this further, it would be figuring out exactly what's wrong, checking all the stuff with all the measurement stuff we learned earlier, making sure it's all in the right place. As things aren't in the right place, redraw them, move them around, fix the size of the shapes, get it just right. Check those angles, make sure they're all where they should be. And I know a lot of this stuff is really basic for some of you, but I swear, even if you're pretty comfortable with your drawing, just going back to this stuff will help all your artwork. Again, just getting back to those fundamentals. The better I get at art, the more I realize that it's really that grasp of fundamentals that separates good work from bad. It's really not fancy painting tricks or anything like that. As fun as that stuff is, it really just comes down to these fundamental things, and that's where the work really lies. And so I need to, just like everyone else, keep working on their fundamentals, keep improving, keep getting better. This is sort of a never-ending thing that we all have to do. All right, so I'm probably just going to leave it like this. The amount of time you put into each of these drawing master studies really depends on you, really depends on how much you're getting out of it. But I'm going to have you do some varying lengths on these. I want you to do some fairly quick ones just to learn how to, generally get the drawing in, do that initial block in, just because it's so important to get those, first top, bottom shapes, drop those first verticals, horizontals, get the width, the height right, do all that sort of stuff. But I'm also going to have you do some longer ones, because then you start to get into the point of refinement, of getting things just right. And there's a lot to be learned from doing that. Of course, the third and last exercise that I want to show you is a bit more focused on getting things exactly right and putting that extra time into it. So actually, let's go ahead and get started with that. Yeah, let's go for the third exercise. All right, so for this third exercise, this is going to be our longest exercise for this week, the most involved, the most complex, the most refined exercise. Now, when I was originally thinking of how I wanted to train people to draw, the first thing that came to mind was actually teaching through cast drawing. Cast drawing is a very classical technique of learning how to draw. And basically what it is you set up a plaster cast of either, traditional Greek, Roman sculpture, or, perhaps some sort of Renaissance Baroque sculpture. Michelangelo's David is a, commonly used one. But, excuse me, you basically take this plaster cast of this traditional sculpture, set it up in extremely controlled lighting, and do a faithful reproduction of that to the best of your ability. And they're often very time-consuming, exhaustive exercises that end up with a very refined drawing. And I was lucky enough to get a chance to do some of this, and it was extremely beneficial to my drawing ability and my ability to see things. But the unfortunate part about cast drawing is you need a cast. And because I'm trying to make this course sort of accessible and affordable for art students, I understand that a lot of you guys don't have the extra cash sitting around to go ahead and splurge and buy one of these plaster casts. You can find some decently affordable ones that maybe would run you maybe $100 or something like that. But then again, you have to keep in mind a lot of the higher end ones are several $100s, and sinking several $100s into a cast is a bit of an expense for a lot of people. And so I wanted to understand that and kind of find another way to get you at least some of the same benefits. All that said, if you do have the funds to get an actual cast and do a proper cast drawing, that would be a wonderful thing to do. I just don't want to force people to have to do that. It's a very dedicated thing to buy. If you can split it between a few people, it's not too bad. But then again, that kind of requires you to have a studio set up, and it's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to manage. So I wanted to keep that in mind, and so that's sort of what I'm doing this alternate assignment for. The wonderful thing is we also have what's known as Bargue drawings. I'm probably getting his name wrong, but essentially it's an entire book of these wonderfully, beautifully done cast drawings, where he did drawings of classical Greco-Roman sculptures, and now we have access to all of the plates of his beautiful drawings. And there's actually a printed book that you can pick up, and it has all of these in it, and there's even instructions on how to do proper copies of these. If you're really interested in doing it, and you're really interested in doing all of the techniques and the method that he's outlining in the book, that's fantastic. It's really good to do. I've done several myself way back in the day, and they were fairly useful. That said, I am actually not using these exactly how he probably intended. I'm not going to teach the technique that's taught in that book. That said, if you want to learn that technique, fantastic, go for it. I'm mainly using these as a good jumping off point to teach you how to do really refined, slow, traditional cast drawing. And so, even though I'm not going to be doing exactly the same things that are taught in the book, a lot of the same knowledge will carry over, of course. And so for these drawings, plan to spend a long time on them. It's not the end of the world if you spend 20 hours on one of these. It's not uncommon for cast drawings to be 40, 60 hours long. And even though these are not exactly cast drawings, you're working from a 2D reference here, they can still stretch into 20, 30, 40 hours long if you put the time into them. And so basically they're just an excuse to get things absolutely perfect. And so of course we're going to be doing it a lot of the same way that we started with the other drawings. establishing your top and bottom, first of all, and then figuring out where your center point is on these things, where exactly that line is. Again, if you're doing this traditionally, it's easy to do it with a stylus, or if you're doing it digitally, it's pretty easy to measure things separately. So start to figure out where your center point is, drop some verticals in here to start to figure out this stuff. If you're interested in the book, it's a great resource and will teach you a lot of different things. But I'm mainly interested in training your eye, and find that the technique laid out in there can get a little bit mechanical, but of course it's still extremely useful. So first of all, I'm just going to go in here and sort of block in the general shape of this thing. Get things generally where they're supposed to go, and we'll kind of refine from there. I'm definitely of the school that it's easier to fix something once it's down than to get something absolutely perfect the first time you put a mark down. I have an easier time seeing when something's a little bit off than necessarily getting it just right that first time. You might be a little bit different, and you might have an easier time drawing things absolutely perfect the first time and then leaving them alone. If you're more like that, more power to you. I, for whatever reason, just do not work that way. And so I've learned that, and I've learned that I can just kind of correct and fix things along the way. So for the time being, I'm mainly excusing myself of all of the detail work that's going on in this thing. There's lots of little details going on. There's lots of little curves and muscles and shapes going on in here. But for the time being, I'm not going to be too interested in those. I'm just going to be blocking in the huge shapes, getting everything more or less in the right place. Having those center lines is really handy because it does give you a point of reference for just how far things should be extending in or out from those lines. I've actually never done one of these digitally. Most of the time I've done them traditionally with pencil. But again, I want to demo for all of the many people that I'm sure will be doing all of this stuff digitally. Of course, you can see the furthest point out on this side is this little ridge of the back. And so you want to make sure that that is the furthest point out to the left. Alright. So again, just breaking things up into halfway points, figuring out where those are, what those shapes look like. Erase, redraw. Remember, simplify as much as you can early on. There's no sense getting into those little tiny details until you've got things in the right place. It's really one of the most important things about drawing in general, is not getting caught up in details too soon. Just like we do on the master studies, blocking in those major shapes first. You want to do the same thing when you're doing these drawings, and that you're getting the major shapes generally in the right place, get those angles generally right, and then as you start to get those accurate, you can go in and get those particular lines and curves just perfect. But get the general shape just right first. That's the priority. So again, use some verticals, use some horizontals, see where things are lining up. Looks like this pit over here is right about there. So obviously, since this could be a 20, 30 hour drawing, I'm not interested in demoing the whole thing today. Obviously I could do a 20 or 30 hour drawing and speed it up for you. Or I could show you, I could record a 20 or 30 hour demo and post that all online. But you'd probably just lose your mind trying to watch that. So rather than do that, I just kind of want to focus on the start of this. And then basically it's the same technique, just continuing forward for a lot of hours to get it just right. So now at this point, I've got the general block in, and so at this point it comes down to getting it just right. Using some of the tricks we've learned so far of like flicking your eye back and forth, figuring out those proportions, looking at negative space, erasing, redrawing, checking your angles, checking your drawing, getting everything absolutely perfect. And the wonderful and, of course, kind of terrible thing about drawing like this is that the more you do this, and the more you do check yourself, the more you do measure things, the more you're able to see that's wrong. The more you'll notice the imperfections in your work, the more you'll notice those little inaccuracies you've got. And that's really what you're shooting for, is developing that eye, that critical eye for seeing what's wrong and what's right. And as you develop that over time, it'll really help all of your drawing, because you'll know exactly when things aren't looking quite right. And then you've got the tools in place to figure out precisely what isn't working, to figure out precisely where that problem is. There's a lot of things you can break down in art, including how to break down what color something is and how to figure out what's not working. And same goes for drawing. These really basic techniques of learning all this measuring, learning all these angle techniques, learning how to drop verticals and horizontals. That's really the toolbox you need to have so that you can fix your drawings as you realize they're wrong, and to check yourself as you're going along here. Because it's really easy to just sort of go along with the drawing and sort of just hope that everything's in the right place. And, sometimes you can get it close enough, quote unquote. But for the time being, for this week, I don't want you to be satisfied with close enough. I want you to be satisfied with getting everything absolutely perfect. You'll probably lose your mind trying to do it, but that's part of the idea. Remember that the goal is not to, finish the most drawings. It's not even to have gorgeous drawings at the end. The point is to have a better eye, a more trained sensibility of seeing what's right, seeing what's wrong. And sometimes when something's really wrong, it can be easier just to wipe it all out and try again, rather than fixing every little thing. It'd be easier just to erase everything. Remember, reduce things down to straight lines if you're really having trouble. Take out those little minor details for now and just focus on getting those major lines in there. Some of the bark drawings you'll notice actually have two versions of it. One that is a simplified down version that just shows the angles. And that can be a really handy thing to look at because it can show how to simplify a drawing like that. I'm starting with one of the more complex ones. If I'm not mistaken, they're actually ranked in terms of difficulty, and so it's not uncommon for students to have to do a certain number of some of the beginner difficulty ones, and then before moving on to some of the more complex ones. I'm fairly certain this and of course some of the others land in some of the more complex territory. So if they seem a little daunting at first, don't be too afraid, or pick something that looks a little bit simpler. Again, using the little mirroring technique, see what looks like it's sticking out. This angle of the back seems a little bit off. Seems a bit too prominent. So it looks like the angle here, a little bit shallower. Now, obviously, these drawings are very highly rendered. There's a lot of modeling of light and shadow, and that's definitely something you can and perhaps should get into, but it's actually kind of up to you. I'm not too focused on light and shadow this week. That's actually something we're devoting an entire week to later on in the course, is studying light and form. So for this week, I'm actually mainly interested in just getting things in the right place. And so there's really no need, unless you feel extra motivated, to do all of the rendering that you're seeing in here. These are highly rendered cast drawings, and there's a lot of sensitive modeling going on in here that shows off an incredible amount of form. Which is part of the benefit of these cast drawings. But there's a chance that as we get more into the light and shadow week, we'll perhaps revisit this or something similar to it to pay attention more to the modeling. For now, mainly getting everything in the right place is really what you should be focusing on. If you spend a few extra hours getting the drawing, just a line drawing, absolutely perfect. But forgo the modeling, that's probably a better use of your time for this week. Just use these as a wonderful classical reference point to do some drawing studies of. And there's a chance if you really, you get a lot out of this and you really like the exercise of doing cast drawings, through these reference drawings, there's a chance you'll get so hooked on it that you want to actually pursue a cast drawing. And I'll try to find some resources for you guys to actually study up on that kind of thing. And perhaps some of you will want to do that. Casts are wonderful, beautiful things, and you can do tons and tons of studies of them. So perhaps some of you will want to do that if you really get into it. There's also a slim chance that if you're currently going to an art school that your school might actually have some casts. That used to be more the case before a lot of the art schools threw away their cast back in, I believe, the 60s and 70s. But there used to be a tradition of having casts on hand. and there might still be a few around. Now, for any of the beginners kind of coming into this pretty fresh, without a lot of drawing experience, this can seem really daunting to go into this kind of exercise. Because you look at the finished drawing and you're like, oh my god, it looks beautiful, it's amazing. How am I ever going to draw that? And that's sort of why I did these exercises the way I have, in that that first exercise, it was all about those black and white abstract shapes. You know, we took something that was a really gorgeous drawing, in that case of a portrait, and we broke it down into those really basic shapes. And you found, odds are, if you put the time into it, that when you flipped your drawing around and all that, it actually looked pretty accurate. It looked like a face. It looked like whatever your model or your reference image happened to look like. And that's the lesson you really should be keeping in mind the whole time, is that you were able to draw those abstract shapes. And if you're able to draw those abstract shapes, you can really draw anything. Drawing abstract shapes is the basis of drawing. All it takes now is taking something that looks real and reducing it to those abstract shapes, reducing it into its fundamental forms. Learning to see things as abstractions rather than what they are. Look at something like this and don't think of it as a figure, think of it as a group of shapes. And something you might do that could help you is flip everything upside down. It all of a sudden turns into this weird, unrecognizable grouping of shapes and lights and shadows. And something like this might be really handy if you're just starting out, to get your mind away from drawing things and actually just draw shapes. So even if you're a little scared because you're just coming into this without too much knowledge, don't be too afraid. Just try to treat it as abstractly as possible and do the best you can. Again, I don't expect you to do beautiful, amazing, wonderful drawings. I expect you to start training your eye to see things better, to see things more accurately. And that's what I'm focused on. I don't really care if you're doing beautiful drawings this week. That's not the point. The point of this week's lesson is not to see who can do the best drawing. The point of this week is to see who can see the best, who can understand things the best, and to just improve your ability to see just a little bit. And you'll find that just by going through this slow process of really slowing down, of taking your time, you will find your eye getting better and better the more you do it. We're so used to doing fast drawings and stuff, at least a lot of us, that we just lose sight of these like really slow, meticulous drawings. And there's something about just taking your time, realizing like, all right, I'm going to put 10 hours into this drawing, and so I'm going to get everything absolutely perfect. That just taking that step, taking that mental step, will really slow you down and let you see things more accurately. So I'm sure this isn't the most exciting demo in the world to watch, but hopefully you're still getting a little something out of it. Let's go ahead and check myself here. Let's see where this point drops down to. And so it looks like this relationship is just a little bit off. And so at this point, I should realize, all right, if there's this much space down here, is it because this thing needs to be moved in, or is it because this shoulder needs to be moved out? And so then you really need to start measuring things and figuring out, did I make this out too far? Did I make this in too far? Start figuring that stuff out. And just by looking at it, it's looking like this should probably be moved in a little bit to the left. It's looking like I gave that just a little bit too much room out there. And I do want to encourage you guys not to cheat too much if you're doing this digitally. There's obviously easy ways that you could cheat. You can take this drawing that you've got over here and just paste it onto your drawing and just trace everything or something like that. Like it's very easy to do that, to check yourself. But try not to do this too much. Obviously it's there, and if you want to do like a serious check on yourself, it might come in handy to get things, extremely accurate. But in general, resist the temptation to do it too much. If you lay it on top, it looks like I'm mostly accurate in most places. There's just obviously a few tweaks. But try not to do this too much. Obviously it's there, it's an option, but it's not really what you're trying to do. You're trying to train your eye, not necessarily even do the most accurate drawing. I don't care what the drawings look like, I just care that you're actively training your eye. You're actively trying to get it better and better, see more shapes, see more accurate shapes. So actually for this week, I'm less interested actually with assigning a certain number of these drawings as a certain hour amount of drawing. Because again, you can break this up into doing shorter drawings or longer drawings, but either way, you're just going to be taking your time on putting hours into drawing, getting things right, measuring things, getting into this routine. That's what I'm interested in seeing. If you do 20 drawings, great. If you do 2 drawings, great. As long as you learn to see a bit better, that's what I want to see. Now, odds are you're going to get a little frustrated at some point if you're a bit like me, in that you're not going to have the patience for this sort of stuff. This kind of drawing requires a lot of patience. And I know, at least for me, I am just not a patient person. Patience does not come easily to me. Um, I am very good at doing fast drawings. I'm very good at doing a fast painting, just getting it done, moving on to the next thing. Taking my time and going slow is not something that comes extremely naturally to me. And so I remember the first time I was doing cast drawings, and the very idea of spending 20 hours on something was just baffling to me. But I forced myself to do it, and I had an instructor, so obviously that helped because he'd keep pushing me to, no, it's not done yet. No, you need to keep working on it. No, it's, needs more refinement. It needs to be better. It needs to be more accurate. And so having that push really helped me. And so hopefully the community aspect of having each other there to critique one another's work, as well as all the great instructors we've got, will really help you to push your drawings into that place where they really are extremely accurate. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to be a little bit lazy and not spend too much time on this base, but you've got to realize that if you're really interested in doing one of these to completion, people actually take the time to completely draw and render these bases to perfection. So just keep that in mind. So one of the things you will learn from doing cast drawing, from doing these studies, is patience. And for me, that was extremely useful in that it taught me that I can spend a very long time on a piece if I force myself to do so. And often the results are extremely good from doing that. You'll get a better, more knowledgeable result by taking your time on something. And so that came in handy when I started doing more finished paintings, finished landscapes in my case. So even though it wasn't necessarily the most fun thing, it was extremely useful because it taught me how to finish something more completely. So sorry if I'm zoning out a little bit here, but as you can probably tell, it's easy to get a little bit wrapped up in these drawings. It can be a very meditative process because you can get so focused in on what you're drawing, focused in on each little shape, focused in on the major shapes, major values, that you can kind of lose yourself in it, and you can kind of lose track of time if you get into it. So, although it might seem a little bit boring at first, give it an honest shot of like trying to devote yourself to it, and you might be a little bit surprised because it is fairly satisfying once you get into it. And flipping things, checking myself. So maybe at some point, if there's enough interest, perhaps I will pick up a cast myself and show you how to do that. The main thing to do is keep your setup the same. That's sort of the wonderfully difficult thing about doing uh, proper cast drawings is you need a setup that remains uh, exactly the same day in and day out. Because if you're going to spend 60 hours on it, uh, it's not really a good thing if that setup is changing day to day. So you need lighting that's extremely consistent. You need a viewpoint that's going to be exactly the same every single time. And that's not really a problem that you run into when you're doing something like this because you've just got this static 2D reference you're working from. But when you're working from a three-dimensional object, making sure you're standing in the right place every day becomes much more important than you might think. And making sure the lighting is exactly the same every day is also important because you got to realize that unless you've got constant north light in your studio, your lighting is going to change drastically throughout the day. And so getting a setup like that remains the same becomes a challenge in of itself. And so if you're really devoted to that, there's some wonderful articles out there where artists have described their cast drawing process. They've also described a lot of their Bargue drawing process where they actually do something similar to this. Perhaps a little bit closer to the traditional method, but I wanted to take it and make it a bit more applicable to all of the artists that I'm sure are going to be doing most of their exercises digitally. As much as I was trained traditionally, I recognize the value of digital training and the value that you can get from just working digitally. Although it's great that we're going to be going into traditional stuff, and there's a reason I'm going to be teaching you guys that, I understand that so many artists have this traditional or digital leaning rather, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. And I think if you do it right and you use your resources right, you can still learn a whole lot from doing it. And so I want to kind of cater to that need and make sure you guys are still learning a lot by taking that digital technology and now taking it back to this extremely classical technique for learning how to draw. Again, drawing and redrawing. There's nothing wrong with erasing what you got and then drawing it again. Sometimes leave a ghost of what you had there before and kind of draw on top of that. Erase it again, draw it again, get that curve just right. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's how I do most of my drawing. It's taking something that's somewhat accurate and then just making it a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And if you keep doing that for long enough, eventually you have a pretty solid drawing to look at. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't necessarily want to do, a 15-hour drawing in a single sitting. I know some of you guys are going to be crazy about that and just going to go for it. But there is the risk of doing that in that spending too much time in a single sitting can leave you a little bit blind to the mistakes you're making. It's very, very easy to get caught up in a drawing and totally lose sight of very obvious problems with it. And so there's a lot of advantage to taking a step back, taking a break from it, and working on something else. And so with these studies, try to break them up a little bit. Work on one for a while, then break off and do something else for a little bit, so that you're not spending too many hours on the single one. There's nothing wrong with doing, a 4 or 5 hour stretch on a single drawing, but try to resist the full day on a single one. Try to break it up at least a little bit. Because since you guys don't have a teacher standing, right over your shoulder, it can be easy to just kind of keep going with the drawing and lose sight of what's potentially wrong with it. Because right now, this drawing's looking decently accurate or something, but if I were to step away from this for a day and come back to it with a fresh eye, odds are there'd be some really glaring mistakes that I'd see all of a sudden, and I'd be like, oh my God, how did I possibly miss that? It's so obvious. And so it's sort of why we should always be stepping back from things, trying it again, so kind of force yourself to do that. If you can do this with other people, that'd be really great, because then you can periodically, every half an hour or something like that, get up and take a look at each other's drawings and correct what you see wrong. It serves a few purposes. First of all, of course, it gives you a fresh eye on your own work, having it critiqued by someone, having someone take a look at your reference and see what they see wrong with it, see what angles you're getting wrong, that kind of stuff. That's extremely useful to have that. It's also useful to give that critique to other people, to actually take a critical eye at someone else's drawing and figure out what's wrong with it, figure out what's not working, what can be improved upon. That's a really useful thing for you to do, learning how to develop that critical eye, seeing how something is wrong and how it can be made better. So I strongly encourage you to ask for and give as much critique as you can, because it will help you with your own work. Now, I'm sure there are some classically trained artists that will probably give me a hard time with how I'm teaching you guys to draw. But there's a lot of problems, honestly, with the academic training that some people get. Some people can get so academic and so locked into these techniques, like sight size and whatnot, that they lose the ability to really draw with their eyes. And so from my experience, from what I've seen, what you're interested in doing is training your eye, not necessarily learning how to be a copy machine. And honestly, I think I've seen some of the academic traditions get a little bit too close to just being copy machines, where they're taking something and so accurately reproducing it through so many mechanical means that it loses any life it might have had to it. And so I'd rather teach you to use these tools to train your own eye, to see accuracies and inaccuracies in work, and to draw the best that you can possibly draw. Academic training can get a little bit too close to copying for my liking, and I'm not interested in teaching you how to copy something. I'm interested in teaching you how to see for yourself and how to see things accurately. You'll notice that I'm keeping my guidelines in there. I suppose I haven't really mentioned that, but there's nothing wrong with keeping those guidelines in there for the whole duration of the drawing. They're not really messing anything up by being in there. They're just kind of giving you reference points to base your whole work off of. This is something you could even do if you go to a life drawing session, for instance, drawing from life. Obviously, you're not going to be able to draw the halfway point on the model, but you can still apply the same principle. You can put that top to the bottom down in your page, and then put up your pencil to the figure and figure out what that halfway point is. Figure out where those vertical lines drop down. All these techniques apply when you're drawing from life as well. For the sake of ease of demoing and the fact that I know a lot of you guys are going to be working from either photos or, in this case, master studies, I'm more interested in teaching that sort of technique. But it all obviously applies when you're working from life as well. So next time you go to a figure drawing session, rather than just like starting to draw with the head or whatever, and then the drawing ends up where it ends up, try actually starting with a top point and a bottom point, and then figure out a halfway point as well, and see if it might not help your drawing ability. You might end up with a more accurate drawing than you're used to. So something to think about. And again, just as a word of encouragement, if you're frustrated and bored and wondering what the point of all this is, I promise that if you put in the hours this week to do these studies as faithfully as you can, that the next week, when we're doing a little bit more drawing from life, you're going to do some of the best drawings you've ever done. I promise they will be more accurate than you've ever done before. I swear that just like putting in these hours into this kind of stuff, as tedious and as time consuming as it all is, you will notice fairly distinct improvement in your abilities in a very short amount of time. When people ask about drawing, usually it's cast drawings that I recommend for people that are really interested in training their eye to be more accurate. And even if you're happy with your drawing ability, even if you think you're pretty darn good at drawing, go ahead and take a step back and get back into this stuff. Even though I've done this stuff, even though I, have at least reasonably accurate drawing abilities, there's still a lot of advantage to getting back and doing the stuff again. Really retraining your eye, spending that time to make sure it's all accurate. Because it's very, very easy to get into a place where you sort of get used to being good enough with your drawing, and lose sight of getting it absolutely amazing. Because as I started out this thing with, drawing is the backbone of any piece of art that you make. It's that drawing that really distinguishes it. Even if you have everything else going for you, if you don't have good drawing, it's not going to be a good piece. Now, of course, these very refined studies like what we're doing here could be done with other pieces of reference. There are other drawings out there. There are other very sophisticated pieces of reference you could use for this. I'm just using these because they're very readily accessible. A lot of them are still available online, and they are very, very well done. And so it just comes down to being a very easy resource for people to get to. If you want to do this and you want to do some other sort of drawing, that's no problem. It's less important what you're drawing as that you're drawing it with this mindfulness of accuracy, of perfection, of getting everything just right. One thing you'll probably start to notice as you keep working on these is that the changes start to get very minute. Because once you get the general shapes in the right places, it comes down to really tiny shapes, really minor angle changes, and it can feel a little futile at times. And that the changes you're making are just so tiny that it doesn't seem like anyone will notice. And I can definitely relate to that in that it's going to feel hopeless and useless, and why am I doing this? Why am I making this even more accurate? No one's ever going to know. Um, and it's kind of okay in that no one will probably ever know if one of these lines is just a little bit off. Uh, but that's not the point. Again, you're not doing this because you want the best drawing in the world. You're not doing this because you want a pretty drawing. You're doing this because it's an exercise to get your eye to notice every little inaccuracy and then to learn how to fix it, learn how to make it more accurate. And that's what you're interested in. And so, yes, it does come down eventually to a lot of incredibly minute changes, a lot of very subtle differences. And that's totally fine. That's what you're shooting for. So get used to it. Get used to doing what seems like very mindless, or not even mindless, but very tedious work, rather. Because that's a lot of what we're going to be doing this week. Is stuff that seems very tedious and very slow. But I promise you that if you do slow down like this, if you really take your time, you are going to notice a fairly significant jump in your ability to see and draw. And also keep in mind, I haven't done as much, measuring as some of you should be doing. I'm a bit of a slacker, I guess, but do more measuring than you might think you need. It never hurts to measure things. It never hurts to check things. Constantly be checking things. Another thing that I actually forgot to mention earlier is another thing that you can measure, in that it's the angle between obvious landmarks. And what I mean by that is taking two obvious landmarks, say the point of this and the point of this, and then figuring out what the angle is of those two things, and comparing that to your reference. And obviously using some of the same tools we used to check angles. And that's another really useful thing to see if you're getting everything in the right place. It's just one more little tool in your toolbox to check yourself with. Because odds are you're going to be working on this and you're going to notice something's off. Like, for instance, that leg just doesn't look right, or that nose looks off in a portrait or something like that. But you're not going to know exactly why it is. And so that's when you start breaking out those tools, is to check yourself and see, is the nose off because the nose is too long? Is it in the wrong place? Is it the wrong size? Is it the wrong angle? Maybe everything else is wrong and the nose would be right. Maybe, there's tons of different things you can do. But as you start dropping those verticals and horizontals, as you start measuring things, making sure the width's right, making sure the height's right, making sure everything's lining up just right, you can start to figure out what exactly the problem is. So it all comes down to comparing one thing to another, and that's sort of the secret of drawing, is it's all just comparing. And that's why I think it's better to get something down on the page first and then make it more and more accurate, is because then once you get something down on the page, you have something you can compare it to. You have reference, you have landmarks. If you're starting with a blank page, it's obviously a little bit hard to do that perfect first line, but just start to lay something down and you can make it more and more accurate as you go along. Another reason I don't want you guys doing too much rendering this week is that it can be easy to get the drawing to a certain point and then just start rendering things, and then rely on the rendering to solve all your problems. And that's not really a good solution to things. It can be easy crutch to sort of fall back on and just rely on your rendering, rely on your lighting. But I really want you to push and just get that drawing right. Have the strength of the drawing come from the drawing itself. And so try to resist doing as much rendering as you can. If you want to do a little bit just to define some shapes and help you along, that's fine. But I wouldn't do any more rendering than what I've done here, which is just very, very basic stuff. Some very basic values. Some flat values thrown in there just to define some shapes. Alright, so this thing's coming along. Feeling pretty good about it in general. Things are fairly accurate. Obviously I could spend a lot longer on this, but it's not really the point of the demo. And you guys don't want to see me sit here drawing for another 5 hours or something like that. And you're probably anxious to go draw on your own anyway. So for this week, good luck with everything. I know this is not the most exciting week. It's not the most glamorous week. It's not the action-packed week that a lot of people, want. But it is the week that I guarantee you, if you do it to the best of your ability, you will notice very significant improvements in your work. You will, without any doubt, have a better eye by the end of the week. And that's a really nice thing to see, because you'll notice it as you start doing other assignments down the way, that you just have an ability to see things more accurately, that when you put down lines and stuff like that, you're more sure about where they're going, and you'd be amazed at just how comfortable that feels. Knowing you have that ability to take something that you see in front of you and draw it accurately really frees you up. Because a lot of the fear is that we see something really complex, for instance, and we just have no idea how to tackle it. It's really just terrifying because we don't know how to draw it, and we're not even sure how to begin. And honestly, like when I looked at this original Bargue drawing, it's intimidating to me. There's a lot of shapes in here. There's a lot of weird angles. There's lots of forms going on. There's a lot of complexity going on. But the thing is that if you really just take your time, break it down into those simple steps, and kind of just start drawing methodically and as accurately as you can. And if you take your time with it, you can eventually get to that point where you're feeling good about it. And you're getting things in the right shape, you're getting in things at the right angle, and eventually the drawing will slowly develop. If I had gone into this drawing and just started drawing, some of the individual muscles that are shown here, odds are the proportions would be all off, the gesture would be just wrong on the whole thing, and I'd end up with, a mediocre drawing at best. But by taking my time with it and getting everything in the right place before I worried about any of these individual shapes, suddenly the drawing is a lot better than it otherwise could have been. And so hopefully that kind of makes some sense to you, and hopefully these accuracy drawings, these accuracy exercises will really help you this week. I'm fairly confident that it'll help a lot of you, and you'll suddenly notice an increase in your drawing ability, which I promise you is a very exciting thing to see. You'll feel so much more confident about your abilities and so much more eager about drawing new things once you realize that all you have to do is follow these simple steps of measuring, of being accurate with your angles, and of breaking these things down into just abstract shapes. I can't emphasize the point enough of abstract shapes, because really that's so much of what drawing is. It's not drawing what things are, it's just drawing the shapes that they make. And if you can learn to get your head around that, you are, 80% of the way there. If you learn to see and then draw abstract shapes, you're so far along. And so that's what that first exercise was all about, was just seeing those abstract shapes and learning to draw them. And so it's more useful than you might think, and will carry you a bit further. And then, of course, taking all those master drawings that are wonderful and beautiful, and then starting to apply that same understanding to them. And then, of course, taking something like this that's a very refined, detailed, rendered out drawing, and doing a very faithful copy of it. All these things sort of lead up to your drawing being more solid, more understood, and a little bit more faithful to whatever you happen to be looking at. So hopefully this has been a good kickoff for you guys. It's been a lot of fun for me, and I'm extremely excited to see what you guys do and how you improve and how you get your drawings to be even better. This was a lot of fun. I'll try to post as many resources as I can along with the video so that you guys have a lot to work from and a lot to base your drawings off of. I'll try to provide some readings as well so that you'll have some more understanding of some of this classical training techniques and whatnot. And you'll know some more resources in case you're interested in pursuing cast drawing and whatnot. But all the best for your assignments this week. I think you're all going to do an awesome job. And if you really put the time in there, I promise you that by the end of this coming week, you will be better at drawing. So best of luck, and let's get to work.